For most of us, when we think about getting into politics, it's typically later in life. We don't see ourselves being young legislators making these moves because that isn't the narrative that has come out for us, especially for a young trans person. Welcome to Who Is That, the podcast. I'm Taylor Edwards.
And I'm Coy Branscombe. And that was a quote from today's guest, the Director of Health and Wellness Program at the Pride Center of Vermont, a drag activist, and the newly elected State Representative-elect Taylor Small, the first openly transgender candidate to run and win a seat in the Vermont State House of Representatives, and one of only 5 elected transgender legislators in the country. Taylor, thank you so much for joining us on our first ever episode of Who Is That? We're so excited to have you.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Also, with the quote in the beginning, I was like, those words sound really familiar.
You're like,
I was
wait a
that's a
second.
great quote. That's a really good one.
It is a really good one. Yeah, we love it.
Yeah, we were like really empowered by those words and really everything that you stand for, which is why we invited you out here today. And by out here, I mean cyberly out here.
To our studio.
To our studio.
Our virtual studio.
Zoom studios. So yeah, like we said in your intro, you have made some massive milestones with your campaign. And the first question that we're really excited to ask you is, can you tell us about the moment you found out you won?
Oh, absolutely. Um, to backtrack a bit, I really enjoyed Election Day, which is a shocking thing when we put it in the context of the national election as well. Because through this campaign, I ran very closely with now Senator-elect Keisha Ram, who actually also made history on the same night in becoming Vermont's first woman of color in the Senate. You have to remind yourself that it's 2020 and this should have happened way beforehand. But I spent the day with her going around to polling locations and just being able to see all of the other representatives and, encourage people to do their civic duty and to vote. And actually close the night off at her place. She's part of my pod, which I feel like we need during these times. And I think something that's really special about my race is that here in Winooski, Vermont is a small state overall, but the city of Winooski is super small within that. And so we can count our ballots really fast here, which meant that my race was the first one called of the night. Our polling places closed at 7 p.m. At 7:40, I had the unofficial results that told me that I had won. And it was exhilarating. I was ready for it. I had a lot of confidence that we were going to move in this direction based off of course, the primary election and conversations within community. But it truly didn't set in until that night and until I was inundated with phone calls from press for the rest of the evening. So I got a good solid 5-minute, celebratory dance in, popped the champagne, and then immediately went to phone calls after that.
That sounds like a blast, actually.
Yeah.
Sounds like such a fun.
I wish I had been there, kind of.
I love it. Just a 5-minute trip to pop the champagne and then right into the press. I saw there was an article in the Hill about your campaign. Who else contacted you? Were there any big names that you're contacting me?
I was really pumped. One of the first ones that reached out was the Washington Post. And so that was big. Also talked with NBC the night of, and I'm trying to think of the other folks. Of course, all of the local papers, and including our public radio VPR, which is an offshoot of NPR, had reached out. But yeah, those were the big names for the evening. And I think it was the next day when I started to understand that this was internationally recognized, and that folks outside of the US who are intently watching our elections, because they know that it does not just impact the citizens of the United States, but this is a global impact that we're talking about. And so then I, became big in the UK. Apparently, I've done a few podcasts over there, and that was the piece that I was not expecting. Again, I'm a state legislator from Vermont, but it just shows the immense impact of having realistic and true, authentic representation within our state legislatures.
That's so true. That is so true. So exciting. So you put together your campaign within 36 hours, right? And you also received an endorsement from the state's Progressive Party. Can you tell us how that felt and how it felt to put together your campaign that quickly? And also, what inspired you to run?
Ooh, all great questions. So I'll start with the last one first because it was actually Representative Diana Gonzalez who has served in the state legislature for the past 6 years here in Winooski, who gave me a call just a week before the filing date to be able to run in the election. And she just kind of gave me this very broad statement of, can I ask you a political question? And I said, well, I'm not very political, but I'm happy to like offer my opinion. And when I got on the phone with her, she said, have you ever thought about running for office? And my initial answer was, not right now. I had seen, as you said in that initial quote, that is something that I saw later in life, because that is the narrative that we're given, is that young folks don't get to serve in the legislature because we're naive, we're not connected to wealth, or we just don't have the knowledge or connections that, the status quo tells you that you have to have. And yet, we also know that here in the state of Vermont, we have an aging population. So, to be able to turn and have a more diverse population, we need to have young representation in the state house. So, it was from that phone call that I took a second and was like, okay, if you are calling and you are suggesting that this is something that I can do now in my life, I will entertain that. I'll entertain that thought. And so I said, okay, can I just have the weekend and I'll talk to you after that? And she said, how about we talk tomorrow? And I was like, oh, okay, you're making it clear that I have 24 hours to decide. And this is just a testament to who I am as a person. Like 24 hours, 4 phone calls, and I decided to run. And so, with the filing date just being 5 days away from that point, we really had to put a campaign together very quickly. Um, and so that is where I took on the assistance of my drag partner, and we took the hustle that comes along with doing drag and just moved it into the political realm. And so I think it truly was community focused and being able to be surrounded by creatives and queer folks who were connected to technology and being able to lean on those people within community that made it possible to put a campaign together in 36 hours. And then after that, we just kept it going.
Wow. Wow. If you don't mind, who were the 4 phone calls?
Ooh, great question. So I, of course, had to talk to my partner first. He was going to have to deal with it the most. And, it's COVID. We're campaigning during a pandemic. So that means headquarters would be our apartment. So I needed to get his blessing first. And then, of course, I had to call my mom. That feels like another important phone call. And my third call was actually to Keisha Ram because she previously actually served in the state legislature when she graduated from UVM and served for 8 years as a state legislator before taking some time away and then now moving into the senator role. And so I knew in the fact that she holds multiple marginalized identities, she was a young person and she was a young woman of color in the state house. And I just wanted the realistic answer of like, is this worth it? Am I going to make change? Are people going to listen to me? Or am I just going to get really aggravated and not feel like anything is happening? And she gave that encouragement of, yes, you need to do this because we need your voice in the state house. And you are not someone to take no for an answer. So I'm not really worried about you advocating for yourself and being able to push back against those norms. Um, And then the last call was to my grandmother because I feel like she had to be involved in the mix as well.
That's really sweet.
That's so sweet. And what a great community. I love that the whole theme of everything you're talking about right now is community, the importance of community, the support of community, care for the community. And that seems to be just like a theme in your life and how you run your life, which is incredible.
Well, speaking of community, so as we mentioned before, and I'm sure you've been talked about a lot, is how historical your candidacy and victory are, and being the first transgender legislator in Vermont's history. And I like am really stuck on the fact that you're one of only 5 in the entire country. Like that to me is such a small number. And like you said earlier, it's 2020, and this should have been happening sooner. We shouldn't be in such small margins still in leadership. But you are a step in that direction, and I just can't help but thinking, as a member of the LGBTQ community myself, like I'm always thinking of those kids that are watching people like you, and they now have permission to to do that. They're like, I can be that now. Like you have made that a possibility for them, and how does you talk about community? How does it feel having that community, having that foundation underneath you?
It feels very reminiscent of my early work. So when I first graduated from UVM, I was very focused in the mental health realm and very youth focused. So I did crisis stabilization work at one of our designated agencies for youth who were ages 5 to 13. I also supported runaway and homeless youth at Spectrum, which is one of our amazing nonprofits in the Burlington area. And then ultimately decided that I loved working with adolescents and moved into working in Franklin County, which is one of our more conservative areas in the state of Vermont, and did adolescent case management. And I think there is just such a beauty in being able to be an unapologetic queer role model. And so I felt it for the first time when I was there, and just being able to have clients come out as LGBTQ and being able to talk to other folks in the agency and asking like, well, how many of your clients are LGBTQ? And they're like, well, I don't think any of them are. And I was like, well, why would it be that half of my clients are LGBTQ and that's nothing that's listed in their paperwork, and yet none of your clients are? Which started to get those questions rolling of, are we really creating a supportive environment? Are you showing yourself as an ally and someone that these youth can come out to? And so I continued that work in being a board member at Outright Vermont, which is our local LGBTQ nonprofit that specifically focuses on queer and trans youth and their families. And absolutely loved going to the camp that they held every single year. And it is all of these moments where I have my cup filled with queer joy because of being able to see youth who are living their best life, and knowing that it was such a privilege for me to be able to come out in high school, but to know that there are youth who are able to come out now in an elementary school or middle school, and to be able to have those supports is exactly the future that I want to see for not only the youth here in Vermont, but of course across the world.
I want a T-shirt now that says "My cup is filled with queer joy." That
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like future campaigns. I don't know, merch.
We're making note of it.
Write it down. Yeah.
I'll buy one in every color.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait to talk more about that because we have some questions that are kind of geared in that similar vein. But first, I want to talk quickly about the process of joining the state legislature. So you're preparing right now to join the state legislature. What does that process look like? Can we have like a day in your life?
Yeah, a day in my life in pandemic version of orientation is
True.
sitting right here, looking into the same camera for hours on end and learning about budget structure and the different branches of our government, and being reminded about how those branches work on a state level as well as the intersection on the federal level. Um, what else have we learned? Learned a whole lot about phishing emails and how often I'm going to receive them. Those things are tricky, by the way. They're getting really good at sending them. I was shocked. We had to take a quiz on it and everything. Um, yeah, it's a lot of nuts and bolts and a lot of lectures via Zoom. But I think what I'm most excited for is the action piece. So we get sworn in January 6th, and that is what I am looking forward to. I'm a very hands on learner. So I'm taking in a majority of the stuff that is coming my way, but I know that it is. I'm pretty sure I'm going to be sitting in this exact same spot once it comes to serving in the legislature, but at least there will be more interaction, and I'll be assigned to a committee, which is what comes next. Really hoping to be on the healthcare committee and pushing forward how we can make healthcare reform actually viable here in the state of Vermont. But I'm also open to serving on the human services, which has a lot of collaboration and overlap with healthcare.
Yeah. Do you have any input at all into which committee you are assigned to, or do they just kind of draw names out of a hat? How does that work?
You essentially get to pick your top three, and then they try their best to get you into one of those top three. But it's a whole balancing act of which parties are in each committee, how many of each party, what the dynamics are of returners versus newcomers, making sure that it's not just a whole brand new committee coming together. And then understanding gender gaps and making sure that there is an equal distribution of folks across gender identities within the different caucuses.
Hmm.
I just want to go back because I don't know what a phishing email is, and now
Oh.
I'm deeply curious.
I was laughing about that because my husband works for finance stuff, and he had to do a whole phishing training that lasted like a week, and it was really serious. So
it's just those scammer emails. They've gone beyond like, I'm in this foreign country and I want to send you money, to like recreating Gmail, you lost your password emails. It's ridiculous.
I watch too many political dramas because I was like, a phishing email is when they try to get you on a political stance and make you the bad guy, like make you a villain. I need to turn off. I need
The
to stop
news.
watching. Yeah,
Oh.
I need to stop. I need to turn off Netflix. Maybe go for a walk because I was like full on political drama there.
You have been watching a lot of West Wing recently.
It's true. I finally started it. So you earlier you mentioned one of your first calls was to your drag partner and really engaging in that drag hustle to get your campaign off the ground. And I know drag advocacy is a huge part of what you're doing. And there's a quote from you after a drag queen story hour at Fletcher Free Library in Burlington, where you said, people forget about all the activism queens do in the community, that we're more than those dive bar queens who lip sync to songs. And I was hoping that you could enlighten us as to the inspiration behind Nikki Champagne.
Of course.
And tell us a little about your story there and your drag persona.
Yeah, I will just say that we still are those dive bar queens lip sync late at night. I was just trying to show that we are more complex than that. And Nikki Champagne came to be back in 2014. And so this is actually when I first got involved with Outright Vermont, because they put on, it was a fundraiser in their eyes, but was a staple in the drag community. It was called Vermont Drag Idol. And it was exactly that, an amateur drag competition where youth were able to perform. And it wasn't restricted to just youth, it was restricted to anyone who has performed less than 3 times in their life, to be able to have that stage presence, and especially putting the emphasis on youth because, again, a lot of drag does happen in the bar scene. It does happen late at night, and those are super age restricted areas. And so I competed amongst 12 other performers. Spoiler alert, I won. And so it was at that moment that the star rose for Nikki Champagne. And at first, it was just a lot of a community gathering and being able to put on events to have community come together, whether that's a dance party or a drag show. And holding that, Vermont has not really had a queer bar or space in the past 12 years. There was like one little blip of a scene here in Winooski, but we don't have to go down that road. There was a whole lot of controversy around it, and then it closed. So it was short lived, but it means that we have to actively create that space. It means we're taking over these bars or these spaces for an evening and making them queer and putting on a show and collaborating with local businesses who are always open to it because it's such a great time. And so it was actually during that time of controversy around the bar where we were feeling this split that was happening within the LGBTQ community here. And we didn't know quite what to do about it. And the best thing that we could think of was we saw drag queen story hours popping up all over the country and thought, these aren't happening in Vermont. We can create our own chapter. And so we did. And one of our tenets in starting Drag Queen Story Hour was making sure that we were getting outside of Chittenden County. So Chittenden County is like our cultural hub. We don't have big cities here, but if you want to call it a city, Burlington is like the main city of Vermont. And it means that that's where all the multicultural events are happening. It's where you get to learn across difference. But when you get out into rural Vermont, not only is there a lack of diversity, but you're just not really having those greater interactions with folks within your community. So we would go to libraries, and it was as simple as that. We would go, we would read stories for an hour, and then we would do a craft afterwards. And it was always such a heartwarming event because we had amazing attendance. That Fletcher Free one, we had over 100 people show up for, literally to watch people read stories. Like this happens every single weekend, but the second you put two people in drag, folks are flocking to come in. And time and time again, we would hear from the librarians of, these are the most amount of people that we've ever seen in our library before, or there are families here that I have never seen come to our library before. And a lot of the families that they were talking about were LGBTQ families who didn't see themselves reflected in the library, who didn't know that that was a safe space for them to come, or they didn't even know that their library had inclusive books that showed their family dynamics or were able to talk about gender diversity, or just that piece of being able to play and learn across difference. And so it also got a whole lot of flack, but that is just from internet trolls. And I mean that very seriously. Like folks put up a whole lot of stink online. But I just saw it as free promotion because every time, the more that they put up, the more people would come. There was one event that we did actually in Montpelier that got national attention. And there was this woman who tweeted out and was like, we need to get this canceled. And because she did that, we had over 150 people. We couldn't even get everyone into the room because there were so many people who wanted to attend and not a single protester showed up. And of course, it didn't get shut down. So what more can you ask for?
I love that kind of failure on that end. I love that. I love it.
I love to see a Karen fail. That's my energy.
Oh yeah,
it's like my nourishment.
Thank you. I should probably pay you for that promotion. Like I won't even shout her out right now. But
Incredible.
That's amazing. I those are the stories that like I live for on the internet. I'm like, yeah, shut them down. Shut down all these people who have nothing better to do than hop on Facebook and just bully people that they don't take the time to understand. Screw them. But I love that. I love the that your drag advocacy is birthed out of this like finding a place for LGBTQ youth. I feel like we forget about that. Like I turned 21 and like quickly suppressed every year before that, and I tend to forget that these kids need a space to explore their identity. You shouldn't have to wait until you can have a beer to meet people who can teach you how to explore your identity. And I think having these library readings and story times and everything else you're doing is so important for that, and a part of the queer population that gets overlooked because we so frequently mistake identity for sexuality, and gender identity is a sexuality, and just it all people don't take the time to understand the nuances of it, and so they're like, well, what you do in the bedroom is your business. It's like it's more than that. But
Okay, so moving into the policy questions. So tell us, what are your top priorities for the people of Winooski, and how can residents get involved?
Mm. Top priorities for the people of Winooski. Well, I think something else that I will highlight about the most recent election was that we also passed three charter changes. One of them is really significant in my eyes. And I guess backing up a bit, when I'm talking about a charter change, it is changing the laws or governance that is specific to a city or town. And the way that it works here in Vermont is that when you are looking to make that change, such as what we did was all resident voting. And all resident voting meant that all documented residents within the city of Winooski, regardless of their citizenship status, would be able to vote on municipal matters during town elections. So that means that they would have their voice heard in being able to choose who serves on city council, who serves as the mayor of Winooski, and how their local taxes are utilized within the city itself, which is profound in the sense that it's truly moving us towards democracy and being able to have a voice or have your voice heard within community. Um, I hold this one near and dear because my mom actually emigrated to the United States when she was 4 years old. She came from Canada with the rest of my family and actually had a birth defect where she had a hole in her heart and needed surgery that could only be done here in the US, and has been here ever since. She is a green card holder. But what that means is that she does not get to have a say in where her taxes are spent. She does not get to have a say on representation or who is serving her in her best interests. And so we have such overwhelming obstacles for folks to be able to attain citizenship that without a clear and equitable pathway, what we need to do is at least give a voice so folks are able to participate and will continue to participate within their communities. But even though we passed that within the city of Winooski, it still needs to be approved by the state legislature. And we also know here in the state that Montpelier passed the same exact charter change, and it has not passed through the state legislature yet. So one of my priorities is making sure that what the people of Winooski are hoping for when it comes to charter changes are actually coming to fruition and are not held back by the rest of the Vermont legislature. The other piece that really comes up for me is healthcare, and understanding that so many folks across the nation have lost their jobs during this pandemic and in turn have lost health insurance, because the way that our health insurance systems work now is that they are directly tied to employment. If you are employed, you have to go through your employer. And if you are not employed, you better hope that you have enough money to be able to make it onto Medicaid. And so with this system, we are seeing folks who are losing their jobs, losing their health insurance, and their families are potentially getting sick from this pandemic. And now they are unable to take care of their family or are having to balance that budget of, am I going to pay rent? Am I going to be able to put food on the table? Or am I going to be able to take care of myself and my family's healthcare needs? And so that is the other piece that I'm really working on, is moving us closer to Medicare for all, and knowing that we've tried this on a state level before and it hasn't worked because we are such a small state and there is a significant tax burden if we were to move in that direction. But I still think there are steps that we can take, especially in the realm of not having health insurance specifically tied to employment, but making sure that health insurance is guaranteed regardless of employment status.
Awesome.
I'm gonna jump questions here because you invoked the name of Medicare for all. So
We
I'm gonna
rise.
Yeah.
rises from
Under
the
it for you. Here we go. Let's go.
Bernie Sanders rises from the
Yeah.
ground with a plate of Medicare for all. I have to say I love Bernie.
Oh, look at that.
I felt like that
For
could've
everyone
gone either
listening
way.
and not watching the YouTube channel, which you should also watch this on YouTube, Coy has an excellent Bernie Sanders sticker that he put on his water bottle, and he shows it off at least 3 times
A day
per hour.
per hour.
Wow.
The obsession's real. So Medicare for all. I was actually curious because on your website you support a single payer healthcare system, but you don't directly say Medicare for all. Am I safe to assume now that you do support Medicare for all?
Yes, I do. I mean, they are synonymous. They're one and the same when we're talking about the direction that we go in. But there, of course, is always trickiness when it comes to language. And that is the reason why I use the single payer healthcare system, is because every time I said Medicare for all, people were like, we've tried that in Vermont, it doesn't work. And I was like, okay, well, I'll call it a single payer healthcare system. And then maybe you'll actually listen to my ideas now.
And it worked because you got elected.
Yeah.
That is so funny to me.
That's really how you have to do things now. People I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast. That's the whole reason we started doing this, is because there are so many incredible progressive candidates and now elected officials like yourself that people don't know about, but they should. And, also I think there has been under certain politicians, we won't name on this podcast, have really gone out of their way to villainize these really impressive policy stances, like Medicare for all, Green New Deal, and they're unreasonably villainized.
Yes, they're being co-opted
Yeah.
and redefined and turned into something evil. I mean, they try to make them sound evil, and it's like, how can you take the idea that everyone gets to live a healthy life and make it evil? And yet they do.
It's really frustrating. So my question for you is, can you go into more depth? You kind of did a little bit about the inequities that you're going to be addressing in regards to healthcare, and I think for me, I'm interested in how does a single payer healthcare system achieve that specifically for the people of Winooski?
Well, I think it is definitely national thinking. So it of course will impact the people of Winooski. But when we think of a single payer healthcare system, not only do we achieve that first goal of mine, which is not having health insurance strictly tied to employment, but what we're also doing is moving towards the models that are working across the world. There was an article that actually recently came out in the Washington Post talking about the lie that we have been sold around socialist medicine or socialist healthcare, and how we have been told and taught that Canada's healthcare system is terrible. People are waiting in long lines. They're not able to see their doctor. They're paying exorbitant amounts. And yet none of it is true. I'm
sorry. I'm laughing because my husband is Canadian and we currently are in Canada. And he literally went to the doctor yesterday. And it took 2 hours to walk there and come back. It's just hilarious to me.
And it cost how much money?
Oh, yeah. This zero.
Okay.
This many.
Listeners, that's zero.
That's a big old zero. So, yeah, I mean, even talking about the other podcasts, and when I was talking to the folks out in UK, and we talked about the simple act of like, if I broke my ankle right now, what would that cost? Well, I would go to the emergency department, which is a $500 deductible that I need to pay just to even see a doctor. I get an x-ray, that is another $1,000 that I'm paying. If I'm getting any kind of medication, having to pay my copay on that. And then if you have to spend any time in the hospital longer than that visit, you are paying for every single night, you are paying for the staff. And yet we think about the fact that we're paying into our healthcare systems and that they're there to protect us, and yet we're still paying thousands of dollars out of pocket after paying hundreds of dollars every paycheck, for a system that is not working. And so we look at all these other countries and we talk about how their systems aren't working. But this story that you just highlighted, Taylor, is spot on. You are able to walk to the doctor in 2 hours and not pay a cent. It's it's what it should be.
To be clear, he walks to the doctor because we live in a big city, not because we can't afford a car because of the socialized medicine and the taxes or whatever. I don't know.
I just assumed he was like really fit.
Also
like,
that. No, we live in I'm from Austin, Texas, where there was no public transportation. So living in a big city is like a huge deal where I can just walk to the doctor or walk to the grocery store. It's really cool. I just wanted to clear that up just in case.
The socialists took your vehicle.
The socialists took our cars.
Sorry. So I like totally blew us out of order here on the questions that we had.
How dare
But
you?
garbage. That's what I am.
Do you want to go back and pick that up?
Yeah, I'll go back.
You
I'll
do?
just
Okay.
continue it. Yeah. Continuing on the health, you are. I don't know if you're continuing this. I'm sure you have a busy plate, but you have currently, or up until now, been the director of health and wellness at the Pride Center of Vermont, which, for anybody listening who doesn't know, is a statewide nonprofit organization serving the needs of the LGBTQ plus Vermonters. Can you explain a little bit about what you've been doing with them?
Absolutely. So my work through Pride Center is twofold. One piece, of course, is focused on community, which is making sure that folks are up to date on CDC screening guidelines, especially when it comes to cancer, breast and cervical cancer, more specifically, and the impact that it has on our community. We also do a lot of work in getting folks connected to safe and affirming healthcare providers, because one thing that we know is even though we have anti-discrimination laws in place, we still hear stories regularly from folks within our communities who are experiencing discrimination from their healthcare providers and having to find somewhere else to go, which is especially difficult for those who are in rural Vermont when you have one or two doctors to choose from. Usually they know you and your entire family. And so if you were to come out to them, you in turn are coming out to your entire town. And so if that isn't safe, then you have to go into Burlington to go see a doctor, which if you don't have a car, you're riding on a bus for an hour in, and then you're there all day to come back. So a lot of my work is getting folks connected to healthcare providers and making sure that they are able to take charge and advocate for their health. The other piece of the work that I do is working directly with our Vermont Department of Health and making sure that there is an emphasis and focus on LGBTQ inequities, whether that's within healthcare or within the programs and grants that they are putting out into the community, as well as doing trainings with healthcare and human service providers across the state of Vermont, and really focusing on LGBTQ plus best practices and how I can make easier referrals to make sure that folks are connected to healthcare. So essentially, I'm just doing the education work to make my job easier in the long run.
You've really been laying the groundwork for this for years.
Yeah, just slowly making my job easier and easier.
Incredible.
That's the goal. Awesome. Do you want to do the next one? Sorry, I've like ruined everything. We had a plan.
You didn't.
I just like shook it and threw it.
You may go. You may leave.
It's been a pleasure.
No, that is also just so cool. Everything about you is so cool, Taylor. You're amazing.
You think by like, we're like halfway through the questions, you think we'd be like chill now? We're like,
It's not. Yep. Okay, so this is actually a little bit mind-blowing to me. Again, we're from Texas, so keeping that in mind, the governor of Vermont, Phil Scott, said that he would allow a marijuana sales legalization bill passed by the legislature to take effect. He also signed another bill that will expunge past marijuana convictions and remove criminal records for marijuana. That is mind boggling to me to see a Republican governor allow the passing of such progressive legislation. As a progressive yourself, do you see this as a sign that we can follow President elect Biden's mission to heal the soul of the nation without sacrificing progressive values?
It is very interesting to bring up this legislation because just setting the context for Vermont, in our last biennium or the last 2-year term for our legislature, we had a Democratic supermajority or a left leaning legislature that meant that if a bill was vetoed, it would be overturned. Which happened a few times because our Republican governor loves to veto. He is the leading veto governor for the state of Vermont because we've had a very left-leaning legislature and he is not a big fan of the bills that are coming through, including the cannabis bill, which he could have vetoed, but he knew that it would have been overturned and instead decided, well, he really has 3 options. One is he can sign on to it and say, yep, this is good. He can say, I don't really like this, but I'm not going to put my name on it, but I'll still let it become a law. Or he can say, I really don't like this and you can't make it a law, which is vetoing. And so do I think that this is the healing of the nation? I think Vermont has a magic to it that has always been focused on balance. And we can see that through our history because Vermont typically has a Republican governor. And we're talking about a state that goes blue in every election, sends Democratic representatives to the Congress every single year. And yet, with Republican leadership at the helm and a left-leaning state legislature, there is this sense of give and take and understanding and knowing that, yes, there are still folks who are either moderate or to the right, but we also have a lot of progressives here in the state of Vermont and wanting to make this radical change.
Hmm.
So I would say that Vermont has been doing this before Biden talked about healing the nation because we've always focused on our neighbors. We've always focused on community and really engaging in those difficult conversations because that's what we have. We don't have access to broadband internet everywhere. So you actually have to go and talk to your neighbors the majority of the time. And so I think that is such a beautiful piece about this place is being able to have the conversations and not just being keyboard warriors or fighting folks behind screens, but actually digging in and understanding that we can have different points of view. But the one piece that's non-negotiable are rights and making sure that no person is infringing on my right to exist, just like I would not do that for them.
Mm-hmm.
Did you, as you were on the campaign trail, did you have conversations with constituents that were about that were questioning your rights? And how did you address that?
Not once. So I'm really lucky here in the city of Winooski. We are one of the most progressive cities in the state, to the point that we don't even put up a Republican challenger in the general election. It is typically between the Democrats, progressives, and an independent challenger. And so did I talk with folks who identified as being a part of the Republican Party? Absolutely. But when it came to talking about the issues, that's exactly what they wanted to focus on. And that's something that I appreciated throughout my campaign is that I made an intentional effort to make sure that the campaign was focused on issues first, identity second. And that is how people addressed me in those conversations was what are your views on these issues? How are we going to do progressive tax reform? How are we going to move towards a single payer system? How are you going to improve transportation here in the state of Vermont? And then I never had to discuss my identity in the mix because it wasn't important. That was just one piece of how I'm going to be able to show up, as well as one lens that I'm able to use and making sure that the legislation that is coming out is actually focused on those most impacted rather than what we see now, which is maintaining the status quo and supporting those who are already in positions of power.
Yeah. Wow. I have a question and it's formulating. Do you feel like this story that you just told about the Republican constituents or the Republican identifying maybe constituents that you talked to and how they didn't bring up your identity as political because your identity isn't and shouldn't be political. Do you feel like that is evidence that the average Republican or the average person, the average constituent doesn't see identity as political, but that it's sort of more these people at the top, if we want to say, that are making identity a political question?
Oh, interesting question. I I again would say that I think my experiences on the campaign trail are very unique because I do think that identity does play a component here in the state of Vermont, and I think I have an immense amount of privilege in being able to access medical forms of transition and to be able to go on hormones and to be able to buy clothing that is in line with my gender identity and to be able to present authentically on a daily basis. And knowing that when I first came out as trans here in the state, that was not my experience. If I wore a dress in downtown Burlington, I feared and experienced verbal harassment and people following me home and just berating me with these transphobic slurs and telling me how disgusting and horrible I was. I remember one time where I was literally on the phone with my mom as it was happening, and I was like, "I just need you to not get off the phone." And she was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "I'm gonna tell you once I get home, but I just need you to stay on the phone right now." And so those experiences are still happening, especially for folks who do not have a privilege in being able to present as femme as I do. And even then, there is still this level of misgendering that happens. But I think falling back on community, I have so many supports in that realm, whether it's family or chosen family, that allow me to continue on. And I think it feels as something of the past for me, as though my trans identity doesn't come up as often now in my life, unless it is in the realm of politics and being able to make history. And it's very much celebrated, which is the direction that I want to see for the state. And so I think this run is doing exactly that, is kind of breaking down those barriers and walls of talking about transgender folks as mentally ill or as having a difference or a uniqueness that should not be celebrated, and rather now seeing the leadership potential and seeing the contributions that we are able to make within our society or within our communities.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for that incredible answer to that very awkwardly formulated question.
Oh, you are so welcome.
Just a couple of newbies doing our best, you know.
Hey, we're just, yeah, we'll get better. We'll have you back on later, you know?
I can't wait. I can't wait.
We'll do a follow-up. We'll have grown. It'll be great. So continuing the tough questions and continuing this idea of controversy, I guess, is we're gonna get into defunding and reforming law enforcement. Again, another villainized word, defund. Specifically, defund the police is just like trigger word. I mean, I shouldn't say trigger word. I take that back because there are people who are triggered. But it really is like it is a word that really gets at people's goats. So you do have defund on your website. That is so you did not shy away from that, and I want to talk about that. Did you receive any? I mean, I'm going to guess no because you're in a progressive area, but like, did that come with any heat?
A little bit. especially because when I'm talking about defunding and reforming, I'm also talking about educational requirements. And so that is the biggest piece there. Folks are like, oh, well, you want to defund this system, but you also want them to get education. How do you think that's going to happen if you're taking away their money? And so I think, yes, defund has become a really focus word. Maybe that's the way
Buzzword?
that we'll describe it. Yeah, a buzzword.
Yeah.
Or something that I don't know. I think trigger word might be right, because it is only when we are talking about defunding police systems that people get worked up. We have defunded our schools. We have defunded healthcare. We have defunded a majority of our social services, and yet we say nothing about that. And we are fine with that. Yet, when we talk about police systems, which, by the way, for a majority of states, including the state of Vermont, is where a majority of our money goes, is to police systems and military systems. And so, what I see wrapped up in there is this militarization that we are asking of our police officers. We are also asking them to go above and beyond community safety. We're asking them to do mental health checks, or also doing speeding violations, which feels like something that the DMV should be doing, or just all of the pieces that come up when it's involved in policing, and knowing that not only is the system itself based in institutionalized racism, but is perpetuated by laws that are also rooted in institutionalized racism. And so there's this piece of, I don't necessarily want to focus on individual police officers as the issue, because there is a system in place that is not setting folks up for success. We don't put enough training hours in. I think last I heard it was 60 something hours that folks need to put in before being able to go on the force. And honestly, we ask for more hours from hairstylists than we do for police officers, which is mind-blowing to me, especially because all we're asking hairdressers to do is cut our hair. We're not asking them to do mental health checks. We're not asking them to do traffic violations.
I mean, depends on the hairstylist, I feel.
Well, I mean, you might ask them for advice. They might be your gossip friend. But I think that's as far as it gets there.
That is wild. That is wild. 60 hours, 60 hours to become a police officer.
Let's check on it.
We're going to look it up.
Oh my goodness. Ready? So I was off by a 0. So police departments on average require officers to complete 672 hours of basic training before joining the force. When training to become a barber, a person must go through around 1,300 hours of training on average. To become a plumber, students have to complete trade school and an apprenticeship that can take up to 5 years.
Do I feel safer going to get my hair cut? Yes.
Yes.
Am I still concerned? Absolutely.
And not to mention that I think something that I really appreciate that AOC said is talking about our lack of need for police services. In a majority of our communities, because we see this correlation where we have a high police presence, there's also a high crime rate. And yet where we don't see a high police presence is within suburban areas. Police are not patrolling through there. We do not see high crime rates. Why is that? Is that, and it's a chicken or the egg piece here. Is there an inflation of crime when we have these systems present? Or where is that causation coming through? And a majority of the time, it's criminalizing poverty, which we typically see within our city centers.
Which sectors of the community would you like to see that money be reallocated?
Well, I think a great place to start would be funding our restorative justice actions and committees. And so moving into this realm of addressing the harm that is happening rather than focusing on punishment. Because what we see is this trajectory of someone gets arrested, they are put in jail, they have to go through the court system, they then end up in prison and are locked away from society for X amount of time. And then there's this expectation that if you are removed from society for an extended period of time, that you can come back into a society who won't give you a job, who's going to stigmatize you for being in prison. And we're just going to put unreasonable expectations on you and how you are able to participate within society and think that everything's going to be fine or that that is the magical change, and it's not. But if we were to focus on harm and understanding that harm is truly started by having it being acted upon us first. The first interaction that we have with harm is not by causing harm to someone else, it is harm that has been done to us. And so when we address that base level of where harm is coming from and the multi-directional levels of harm, that is when we're going to start seeing solutions to how we reduce crime, how we build our community resiliency, and how we equitably and easily move away from these police systems and move more towards community movements. Honestly, the improvement looks like a more realistic expectation of what we want to see and what maintaining safety looks like in our communities. And so it's a deep, hard look into what is already being done, where those positions can be better allocated. So often I hear this narrative of like, we should just have social workers do it. And every time I hear social workers being like, no, we don't want this responsibility because that's not actually going to change the system. And what we often hear from folks in that realm is around transformative justice, which is truly just one step beyond restorative justice. Because restorative justice still works within the model that we have in place around the judicial system, around kind of this court diversion that happens, rather than transformative justice, which is this beautifully radical notion that we cannot work within the state that exists right now. Because when we talk about institutionalized racism, homophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, that is ingrained within our systems as they are, that's baked into the foundation. And so you cannot create something that is inclusive or equitable or just when that is in the foundation. You have to create something completely new. And so that's this model that social workers are really pushing for, is we need to fully reimagine our justice system and where we want to be moving. And really, again, getting back to that harm piece of how we're addressing harm within communities and what those community supports can look like. And this is like a little side note. I'm not a huge fan of increased trainings for police officers, mainly because I like to say that a lot of the trainings are how to arrest people nicely, because that's what they are. Like, if I want to teach you how to be, culturally aware or have cultural humility, as they say, that is essentially your job is still to arrest me, but you are not going to misgender me while you do it. And so I would rather you just not arrest me in the first place. Not saying that I did anything. That's what
Yeah, and now we bring to the real question.
Yeah, now the real drama comes out.
That's something that I had not thought about, actually. So I would rather you just not arrest me for things that don't require or demand being arrested, like homelessness or poverty. It's like
existing.
It's so insane about this is that when you say it, I'm like, well, duh. Why didn't I you know what I mean? It's so obvious when you hear it said out loud, but it's like, how do we get everybody on board with this? That you shouldn't be arrested for silly little things.
This is how
right here, this podcast, reform, electing cool people into office who are going to fight for these things, making your voice.
I mean, and also it's really tied into the individualism that we are taught here in the United States. Like, what is the number one phrase that we hear? It's, you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, which focuses on the individual. You are the maker of your world. And so if you're able to work hard, if you're able to push through adversity, then you will live the American dream. And so we look at folks who are homeless or housing insecure and saying, you're not doing enough. You're not doing the work to get connected, instead of recognizing that there is a larger systems issue that is not supporting this person. And when do we turn from focusing on me, and out to how can I make my community thrive, and understanding that if my community is thriving, I in turn am thriving.
So I want to talk more about mental health and addiction with you, because I know these are things that you're pretty passionate about. This next question was crafted by Kathleen, who is not with us, but I feel like she deserves credit.
She is alive, though.
She is alive. She's not dead. Editing. So we know that nearly half of all transgender people experience a mental health condition like depression and anxiety, and worse, 41% of trans men and women have attempted suicide. Now, COVID has forced doctor's appointments and surgeries to be rescheduled, further impacting the mental health of trans folks. What underlies this astonishingly elevated rate of mental health issues?
Y'all are getting me into my education work here. This is literally what I talk about when I work with healthcare and human service providers, in really understanding. There's this model, this framework that I use called the minority stress theory. And essentially what this theory states is that people within marginalized communities experience stress and anxiety at higher rates than folks outside of marginalized communities. Again, that's not mind-blowing. It's literally what you just said. But what it's really getting at is the bias and discrimination that folks within marginalized communities experience on a regular and consistent basis. And the ways that it shows up is in this expectation of rejection, whether that is based on a prejudice event that the person themselves may have experienced, or anecdotal stories from other people within community, or just understanding. I think of like when I came out to my mother and she cried and said, I just know your life is going to be so much harder and I don't want that for you. And so we know this in society, that we have created systems that are against folks who hold marginalized identities. So when you're going to see a new healthcare provider, you have to gauge whether or not you're able to share your pronouns. And if you do, are they going to respect your pronouns in that space? Are you going to be misgendered the entire time? And when you're being misgendered, how likely are you to give accurate health information to that person when there is no sense of trust? Or I think of lesbian, gay, queer, bi folks who aren't necessarily able to talk about their partners or their spouse with a care provider. And knowing that, again, if I out that my spouse or my significant other is of the same gender, are you going to see me the same way? Are you going to treat me the same way? And what that ultimately leads to is some folks in the community will hide or conceal their identity so that they're able to access services, which ultimately leads to the internalization of those external messages of homophobia and transphobia. So we're not going to mention his name, but the thing that comes out for me is thinking about the messaging that we hear from the White House. And so one of the acts that came out within the last year was an act that said that physicians should have the right to discriminate against transgender patients based on religious practices or beliefs. And so internalizing that messaging says, I shouldn't be able to access healthcare because of my trans identity. That's what that says, plain and simple. And the actuality of what that is we see trans women who have symptoms that are coming up for them that they will not go and see a doctor until it reaches an acute level. I heard a story of a trans woman who had in her genital area, her testicle was growing, and there was clearly a tumor that was growing. And she did not access medical care until it was the size of a grapefruit, because of the misgendering that happened within her practice. And so she went in finally when a friend was like, no, you are in excruciating pain, you cannot tolerate this. And so they went in and she got evaluated, and what happened, she was misgendered through the entire process of that examination, which just in turn told her, like, I should not have gone because I knew that this was going to happen. And so ultimately, we see folks kind of going in two directions. One is we know of the significant substance use within our community, whether that's tobacco use or alcohol, or even harder substances, which we know are very prevalent. Or we see self harm and suicidal ideation. And all of these are ways to reduce those overwhelming feelings of stress and anxiety, and yet they are done in a way that are not productive or healthy to the individual. And so when we see especially suicidality, what we are noting is this lack of hope. This lack of hope that my future is going to be different from my present, that I will never be seen as a woman when I go to a healthcare provider, or my identity will never be accepted by my family, therefore I can't continue on. And so, what I hold, and of course, am evangelizing in a sense, is this piece that it really takes one adult to reduce that suicide risk by half. And this is for both trans youth and trans adults, LGBTQ youth, adults across the board. If you are able to see someone wholly and authentically and honor and validate that identity for that person, you are reducing their risk of suicide by half. It's that simple. It's that simple. And so when we think about parents who will not acknowledge their children's name or will not use the pronouns that their child is telling them, if they were to take that simple act, they are doing suicide prevention for their youth. And so when people ask me, like, I know a parent who's not supporting their youth, like, how do I get them to do it? And you just have to get down to the basic level of, you are putting your kid at suicide risk because of your disrespect, your blatant disrespect. And what is it going to cost you to be able to use the right pronouns or to use their name? Like, what truly is that going to do to you?
Oof, that gave me chills.
I know.
It's so hard. I find this so frustrating. This is like a passion of mine as well, of like just seeing people for who they are and not putting any conditions on the love that we give to people in the LGBTQ community. Um, I like when you were saying about parents not uh, using the correct name and using the correct gender identity. Like it, I know I have stories like that. I have taught people who are like, "Oh yeah, like I'm out, but it doesn't matter because my parents ignore it." And I was like, or like my own personal experience, like like I have family that are like, well, yeah, we're fine with you being gay, but you shouldn't get married though. And it's like
Mhm.
that right there. And it even goes into who you vote for. It has become, that is an act against me, you know, and you can't say that you love your kid and then turn around and say, oh, but you can't, I don't want you to get married. Or I love you. And also I'm going to go and vote for this person who wants to rip your rights away. And that frustrates the shit out of me. Like,
Mhm.
and I can't, like, I've had the conversations over and over and over again with people that I really love and I really want to maintain a relationship with. And it just, there's a disconnect. Um, in your opinion, I mean, first of all, I didn't realize the statistic was that huge. Like one person affirming who you are can reduce your suicide rate by half.
That is wild.
That's like amazing. That one person can have that much effect, and also devastating that we need that.
Mhm.
What I don't even know how to phrase this question. I'm off the cuff again.
Take your time.
Thank you, Taylor.
I'm here to support.
Thanks.
I just also just want to say, and I just want to say how grateful I am for both of you for being so vulnerable about this. And I just am feeling a lot of love right now. I love y'all. I love y'all. And thank you. And when you're ready, Koi.
So my initial question was, what can we do um, to combat the stigma and the discrimination and the even more subtle microaggressions towards trans people and members of the LGBTQ community? And I think a big one you've already said is to see them, to see us.
Mhm.
I would like to adjust that a little bit to what would you recommend for people having these dialogues with people in their lives that are like my family and like these families that we've talked about that just are not there?
Mm. It, this is such a great question, and I think it comes up often. And I even hear this within racial justice circles of
Mhm.
collecting your people and having the conversations with your people. And yes, that means it's going to be uncomfortable. And I think that is something that is deeply based in white supremacy, is this idea that I should be comfortable at all points in my life, and that I don't want to have to engage in this difficult conversation because, oh, they're just going to get upset and they're not going to listen. And the answer is, sure, they might not listen to you the first time. Like, I absolutely love my mother. And I'm sure she's going to listen to this. So, hi, Mom. And I know that she has not always had progressive views around what we want to see for this nation. And there were a lot of conversations around police reform. There were a lot of conversations around Black Lives Matter where we did not see eye to eye. And yet, the piece of it is that I would always come back to the conversation. I never shied away from it. I knew that I would end that call and we would not be on the same playing field. But I knew that if I engaged in that conversation again, she picked it up over time and started to hear, and finally got to a point with this year where she said, I see what you mean. I see what you mean. Like, I see where we need to change when it comes to police systems. I see how voting for Donald Trump, though she can't vote, is an attack against you and your rights. And I've seen what he's done, and I can't be around my friends who are doing this. And of course, my ask of her was like, I ask that you stay friends with these people and continue to have these conversations. Because, again, let's talk about the Vermont way here. It is engaging in the difficult conversations and coming back to them time and time again, and knowing that that is the change. That is the change that needs to happen. Because who else is going to engage in that conversation? No one. What else is going to happen is they're going to be in an echo chamber of conservative views, conservative thoughts, just like we see on the liberal end, is folks only surrounding themselves with people who have the same views as them. And that is so toxic because there is nothing in this world that is right or wrong. There is so much complexity and so many gray areas to it that if we're not looking at all sides, then we're not getting the full truth. And so, yeah, the TLDR version, talk to your people and talk to them often. I had to explain the other day, I was in a work meeting and someone was like, Taylor, what does TLDR mean? And I was like, oh my God. I was like, too long, don't read. And they were like, don't read what? And I was like, okay. Thank you.
I think it's been a pleasure.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I have to go.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I just had to say this is my thesis statement for you. Okay. This is my abstract on what I was talking about.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk to summarize. Host Taylor, do you want to
host? Oh, that's the other Taylor.
I've been like actively avoiding trying to address either of you because I was like, oh, this is so confusing. My head. Do you wanna take us into this next one? I'm still reeling from the last.
I know, incredible, and so many important things to talk about. And I think what strikes me really, this isn't the question, but what really is striking me right now is that you are a state representative elect, and you are talking about huge issues and huge thoughts, and they are nationally important, but they are also individually affecting to the members of your community. And I think part of our mission is to help people understand that that is what a state representative is for. It's not just at the national, at the federal level that people are fighting for these big ideas, these sweeping changes. State representative does that. City council does that in some ways, you know? So thank you for coming on our podcast. And it's just so awesome talking to you.
I mean, there early on when I was answering interviews within that like week period when we didn't really know what was happening with the election, um, the sentiment that I always came back to was the fact that our local city and state government are the protective factors when we see this chaos happening on a national level. So even when we see the president trying to rip away protections from the Affordable Care Act, what we saw here in the state of Vermont is that our legislator passed all of the aspects of the Affordable Care Act so that they were in Vermont law. So if anything happened on the federal level where that was changed and taken away, it meant that people, the residents of Vermont, did not feel that change. And so that is ever important, is sometimes we feel like we don't have our voice being heard, especially when we think of voting third party. We feel that we've been taught that it's throwing away our vote, which is a whole nother talk that we should get into sometime around ranked choice voting and how that is the future of where we need to go. Because then everyone actually has a vote, and that actually makes third parties a viable contender in all races. But all of that to say, when it comes to voting, it needs to always be down the ballot. It needs to be in every election, understanding that here in Vermont, we just voted for state legislators, senators, all the way up to governor, president. And in just a couple months, we are about to have our elections here in Winooski for city councilors and for our mayor. And that is another important election to be a part of. And then guess what? There's another one in a year when we're voting for our senators and who is going to be representing us in the US Senate. And at the end of the day, folks need to understand that voting needs to happen every year, that you need to make a plan to vote every single year, and it needs to be down the ballot. And I would encourage folks to always get an absentee ballot. It's amazing. We've had mail-in ballot voting this entire time. We've just called it absentee ballots. And what the beauty is of absentee ballots are that you can actually research your candidates while you're voting. You can see their name and you can go to their website and see if they align with you on the issues, rather than what we sometimes see are folks voting with the party line, which does not work all the time, because there are such things as moderate Democrats, as well as moderate Republicans or conservative independents. There are folks who ran as progressive Republicans. Y'all, talk about confusing.
my eyes just went cross-eyed.
Yeah, that one really got me. I mean, we had, I don't know about y'all's ballots, but we had 21 presidential nominees on our ballot to choose from.
No.
21.
I mean, I saw Kanye, but I didn't see a lot of other weird names on there.
Well, we had the Communist Party, we had the Abolish the F-35s party, literally a full party that is against, I don't know if you've heard of F-35s, but they're these really loud planes that fly over my city every single day. They're warplanes.
Live your life in such a way that somebody creates a party against you.
Yeah, specifically.
Yeah.
We're the anti-Coy party.
That's
how I'll
me.
know.
I'm the president.
I hate it here. I'm leaving.
Welcome to Who's That, the podcast where Taylor just bullies Coy for an hour and a half.
I feel like we're in a good wrapping up place, actually.
I really want to ask about this though. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Ask about the question. I'm sorry.
Just really quickly, I want to round out the policy part of our discussion by talking about your platform around opioids.
Yes.
Opioids. You have said, We must support our syringe exchange programs, fund overdose prevention, and decriminalize, I am going to mispronounce this, buprenorphine.
Yeah,
Did it?
you
Okay,
got it.
buprenorphine. So, Coy and I are really interested to hear from you about this because we feel that there are many listeners who may not have ever even heard of a syringe exchange program. Can you talk about what that is and why is this something you feel so passionately about?
Oh, huge proponent of syringe access services. And so, what this is for folks who use injection drugs, they have a facility where they exchange their syringes and needles for clean syringes and needles, ones that are sterile. Therefore, they are not reusing the rigs that they had before. And the reason that this is such an important program is from a public health perspective, when folks are reusing needles or are sharing needles with others, there is a high contamination rate and a high epidemiology rate for hepatitis C, for hepatitis B, for HIV, and any other bloodborne pathogens, of course. And so when folks are able to access these services, not only are they able to exchange and have clean rigs to be able to inject safer, but they are also getting connected to the social workers who are working within those facilities, who are offering Hep C testing, who are offering HIV testing, and also offering same day access to recovery services. So if someone was on opiates and wanted to get onto buprenorphine, they would go to the syringe access and tell them their plan, and they would get them connected same day to those services. Or if someone needed to come down from using meth, they would offer those services same day to make sure that they had a safe place to do that. And I think that is the biggest piece that I want to underscore is that it isn't just a place for folks to exchange syringes. It is a place where you can get connected to services. And I think another important piece there is that they give out Narcan. So they do amazing Narcan trainings with folks in the community, making sure that folks have access to Narcan regularly in case they are with someone who overdoses. Also giving prevention tips around making sure if you are using, you're not using alone in case you do overdose, and that when you're using, you're not using at the same time as the other person in the room, because if you overdose at the same time, no one is going to be able to take care of you. And also understanding the fentanyl test strips are available through these services, and knowing that fentanyl, if you don't know, is a highly addictive and highly potent form of opiates. And so it truly takes it's like if you spilled just a little bit of salt on the table, like that much fentanyl could kill you. And so fentanyl has been found in heroin, it's been found in other opiates, and even has been found in cocaine. And so people who would assume that they are just doing their recreational drug, if they're doing the run of the mill heroin or are using cocaine and fentanyl is present, they may be using their normal amount, but will overdose because of the presence of fentanyl. And so having those test strips available allows folks to have a knowledge of what substances they're using when that's happening. And I think in a whole other realm, when we talk about decriminalization of substances, that is my goal across the board when it comes to substances, and especially substances that we have deemed illegal. And I think a lot of folks focus on legalization. They want especially legalization of psilocybin or ayahuasca or these natural remedies. And I understand the reasoning behind it because we overcriminalize these substances and they directly tie to racial inequities within our cultural system. And when we legalize these substances, we also allow them to thrive within a capitalistic market, which is what we see with alcohol and what we see with tobacco. And I do not want to see that with other substances in our society. I would rather there be a decriminalization to these substances so that it is easier for folks to get connected to services so that they are able to get off those substances, because we know that there's a direct correlation to mental health identities there, and that a majority, if not all substance use, is tied to mental health and not being able to process those overwhelming emotions of anxiety and depression or undiagnosed mental health illnesses.
Wow.
Okay, I'm glad we asked that question.
I am so glad.
I was like a little bit worried about like time. I feel like we've kept you a long time, but I'm really glad we took the time for that, because that
We are planned until 6 o'clock, so don't you worry.
none of my devices, I've got Google Docs on my phone and I've got Zoom on my computer, and I am a millennial, so I don't own a watch. I don't even know what time it is. So I've been like panicking.
Well, it's a different time for you. It's
that's true.
4 o'clock for you.
Thank you. Thank you for taking in time zones for me, because I'm just anyway, not about me. Moving on. Thank you. Were you prepared? Did you think that we were gonna are you surprised at our existence?
Y'all, I'm surprised that y'all exist, period.
Same.
No.
I'm surprised you made it this far.
I'm
Right?
surprised, yeah. No, I'm actually really grateful for how loose and fun this is, because I mean, a majority of interviews are very serious, and as you can see, I am a very joyful person. I can talk about very serious things, but at the end of the day, if you're not loving what you're doing, then it's just not worth it, is my opinion. So yeah, no, I love a good fun interview, and I'm always down for them. And fun fact, I did create my own public access television show through drag. So I know all about the startup life and getting into it. So y'all are fine. You're doing great.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I'm glad that you like fun, because that's a great segue into this final part of our interview, which I have labeled the fun part. Titles aren't my thing. So we've got some rapid fire questions. They're lighthearted. They have nothing to do with policy, nothing to do with elections. They are about you and living your best life. And so we're going to spit these out at you and just answer as quickly as you can. Not because we're on a time crunch, but because I like to pressure people on.
Because we have to wrap this up.
And we are wrapping up. No. Okay, so first question is, what is your ideal weekend?
My ideal weekend is literally binging Netflix on the couch. That would be great.
Follow up. What do you like to binge?
Ooh, right now, Queen's Gambit.
Oh, I need to watch it. Everybody talks
good.
about it. I gotta I'm so behind. I'm trying to get The West Wing, which is in the 90s. I'm like,
we watched it in 2 days.
Queen's Gambit, same
Yes.
here. I
love it.
absolutely, I did not think that I would love that show, but I love it.
Welcome to our podcast. Come for the politics, stay for the Netflix recommendations.
What are your dogs' names?
Oh, well, Theo and Charlie.
And what are their breeds?
Well, Theo is my dog. She's a black lab, and Charlie is my partner's dog, and he is a Chihuahua Terrier mix.
I love that.
Very bold eyebrows. It's very cute.
I love a bold eyebrow. If 2020 has taught us anything, it's that bold eyebrows. Very in. What is your favorite comfort food?
Oh, shrimp.
Shrimp? Is there any way that you like them served? What if you're gonna get them anyway? What would it be?
Classy. I want shrimp cocktail.
Yes. Oh my God. I imagine you I've got the flu. I just need some comfort food. Bring me a shrimp cocktail. I love that. I need to fix my life.
That's incredible.
Those are my other, stress food. I wouldn't say comfort necessarily, but if I'm super stressed, it's sour candy central.
Sour candies.
Comfort, it's shrimp cocktail.
Shrimp cocktail. Incredible.
I love that.
What is something that made you smile this week?
Oh, something that made me smile this week. Well, I did an AMA yesterday on my Instagram, and that made me smile because there were so many folks who just said really sweet things, we're cheering you on from South Africa, and I was like, wait, what? So those are the things that makes me smile, and of course the youth that are you inspire me, and I'm like, y'all, you inspire me, so take it back.
What advice do you have for someone wanting to be more involved in the state and local level politics?
Do it. Just do it. There are so many ways to get involved, whether it's especially youth. I think young folks need to be more involved in their communities. So, whether that's serving on your school board, going onto your city council, getting onto a local commission, there are so many ways to participate. And maybe the best way for you to do it is to get involved with a campaign or be a poll worker. Those are both great options.
Okay, final question. Do you watch RuPaul's Drag Race?
Yes.
All right, who's your favorite queen?
Ooh, Alaska Thunderfuck.
And with that, we've outraged the drag community.
Absolutely. I mean, Trixie Mattel takes a close second. I love her, but like Alaska will forever be my queen.
There we go. You heard it here first, folks. Taylor, thank you. I can't even say this enough. We've said it 100 times already, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I honestly can say that I feel like I have learned so much, and you have opened my eyes to new ways of viewing policies that I thought I had really strong stances on. I'm going to be thinking about this for weeks, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to join us. I'm sure Taylor feels the same. She's nodding right now, but I keep talking over her.
We are so honored. We are so honored that you came onto our little podcast, the inaugural episode of our podcast. You have just been an inspiration. You have been an educator. You have been vulnerable with us. You have been amazing. And I'm still starstruck. My heart is beating more slowly now, but I still think you are just so cool, Taylor.
Y'all, flattery will get you everywhere.
Yes.
Like, I'm blushing. You are amazing, and I feel bad for every guest who has to follow me. So sorry.
So do I.
Same, honestly.
Well, congratulations again on your victory in this election, and we wish you the best of luck as you continue your orientation. We would love to have you on again after you've settled into your new digs. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You're incredible.
Okay. I can't wait till I come back.
Yes,
okay.
neither can we.
Oh, yay.
Have a great night.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I have to pee and then we need to celebrate. Hold on, I've been like bursting like since halfway through this episode.
I really hope Kathleen puts this in the final edit.
Oh my god, I've got to pee so bad. Oh,
okay.
Okay, I'm back. Oh my god, we did it.
Oh my god.
That was the best. I loved every second of that.
Oh, I can't believe that we get to do this. I'm like shaken to my core.
I also am shaken to my core, and I am like stunned. That was so much fun.
Yes, she is the coolest person I've ever met.
Same.
No, seriously, she blew my mind.
I'm just want to say I'm super grateful to be on this journey with you.
Oh man.
I know.
I was so mean to you during the podcast, and now
I liked it. I liked it a lot. I think this is gonna be a really cool thing.
Yeah.
Not gonna be. It is a cool thing. We're doing it. We did the damn thing. And to anybody who is crazy enough to listen to the two of us gab, make sure that you follow us on the social medias. We are on literally all of them.
We are everywhere.
It's all at Who's That Pod, the exception being Twitter, because Who's That Pod was taken, so it's Who's the Pod. Just take out the A in that.
Who's the
Maybe one day we'll be big enough that we can fight them for the Twitter handle.
Chloe, who is the
Who's the Gesundheit.
And make sure you check out our check out. Oh no, I've been in Canada way too long. Make sure you check out our YouTube channel where you can watch our faces and also read the captions while we talk.
Yes, for anybody in your life who may be hearing impaired, please send them to our YouTube channel. Again, it's Who Is That the Podcast. Very easy to find, hopefully. I don't know, I've not tried, but We want to be accessible and inclusive. And if you're listening and you can think of other ways in which that we can do that, please tweet at us, message us on Facebook, message us on Instagram, whatever. Reach out.
Send us an email at
info@whosthatpod.com. Yeah, any way that you can reach out to us. Also, if there is a candidate in your state or your hometown that you're particularly excited about, again, email us at info@whosthatpod.com. We would love to hear about them. And if you're a politician and you would like to come on our show, you can also email us at info@whosthatpod.com. How many times am I going to say the email?
Say it again.
info@whosthatpod.
And finally, if you like what we're doing here and you think it's cool and you want to support us doing what we're doing, we would be eternally grateful for your support in helping us get the word out about who these people are.
Yes, and lastly,
Oh, okay.
lastly, wherever you're listening, if you could give us a review, 5 stars would be amazing. Leave a comment. It really does help us with our ratings. So, any more
Yes.
self-promoting we need to do?
No, I don't think so.